So it's been a while since my latest video, but that's just because I've been busy doing the paintovers of the challenge, which was vastly more popular than I could have anticipated. So once again, everyone, thank you if you participated. I'd happily do some of these things again in the future, but I'll have to rethink the whole paintover thing. But for now, let's focus on this character design that I made, which is, surprise, surprise, once again, part of the DnD campaign that I'm a part of. Now, I'm not going to spoil the story of the character, but one of the main things that sets a portfolio piece apart is going to be storytelling, and specifically personality, because personality tends to be the thing that most people miss or lack in their portfolio. People can design cool characters with cool armors, cool weapons, etc. But cool only gets you so far. Something starts becoming iconic if you can actually tie a specific story to it, a specific personality that's linked to the character that we created. And that's kind of the emphasis of what I'm trying to go for here. So what I can give away for this character is a fighter, which means he's going to have weaponry and a suit of armor. He's also a poet, which means he likes reading and he likes writing, and that's something that I wanted to be part of the character design as well. Now, aside from the reading and writing, he's obviously a little bit more on the elderly side. He's had quite a lot of experiences, which means he has a very rich life when it comes to the stories and the adventures that he's been on. He's also part of the crew of a ship, which means once again the sailor aspect should be visible. So now I have a few core things that I immediately can reach for when I'm creating these thumbnails of this character in particular, being armor and weaponry, elderly, adventurous, and a sailor background, as well as obviously the writing and the reading. And this gives me enough to get a good feel for the personality. And at this stage in the thumbnailing process, I don't want to get too lost into the details. Like, sometimes people confuse storytelling with detail. Details help with adding storytelling, but you can start telling a story without having added any single detail at all. The story quite often lies once again in the personality that you're trying to convey. So the shapes we decide to use, the posture that the character is striking, so the poses that he tends to handle, like how he's carrying things as opposed to what he's carrying. Those are the questions that I personally really love answering and love thinking about. So how is the sword being carried? Like in this case, oh yeah, he's using the axe as a cane, which once again ties into the elderly aspect, but also the fact that he is able to use an axe quite well. So this guy to me captured the essence of my character the best. And usually when I'm doing a design like this, I won't take the thumbnail and start refining it because I want to reinterpret things, but I was quite fond of the way things were working, things were looking for this design in particular. So I decided to roll with it, and as I'm continuing refining this sketch, I'm obviously still going to add new things. So in the thumbnailing process, the detail is not necessarily a part of it. You have essentially placeholders for detail. So I have an axe, I have a sword, I have a book, but I have no real information as to what kind of axe, sword, or book those things are, or even a piece of armor. So those questions are now going to be resolved at this stage, not in the thumbnailing stage. And the reason we do this in this order is because we don't want to get too hung up on specific things before we have an idea of which character fits our design best. We don't want to spend too much time on something that we probably won't end up choosing. And I think that's quite important to realize, because too many people tend to go quite slowly through the thumbnailing process, and that's not a bad thing if you're being intentional about, thinking about the things that you want to add. But most people tend to slow down, not because they are thinking more about what needs to be part of a design, but they tend to slow down because maybe they haven't thought about things too much and they're just sort of getting lost in some of the minute details that don't really have an impact on the design as a whole. So now that I'm at this stage, this is where I can start thinking about, okay, maybe the way that dagger, that sword is attached to the belt could be just, there's a rope stuck between the the knot that's being made by the leather belt itself, which I think is kind of a unique way to carry the sword, probably very impractical, but it once again helps telling us a little bit more about who this person is and how he likes to keep his weapons with him, because he has quite a few weapons on his person. I could have gone for a perfect, pristine, like sheath that fits quite well with a lot of metal clasps, but this kind of gives me a bit more of an idea of the fact that this guy is an adventurer, that he figured out himself how he can carry things the best way for his particular purposes, as opposed to just buying the best equipment. So that's hopefully something that you're able to read. So the character should be like, he should appear like he's cobbled together most of his equipment. He likes to carry most of his equipment with him as well, so he's always prepared. And the axe, you can see as well, the fact that the bottom of the hilt is sort of starting to break apart a little bit because of the pressure. It means he's been using this axe as a cane for quite some time, so that axe is probably pretty old as well. And those are now the fun little tidbits of story that a lot of people would probably look past and disregard, but they really carry a lot of weight. I've gotten a lot of positive comments about this design in particular, about this painting and where it's headed, and a lot of people really seem to enjoy the pipe itself. The pipe I'm also quite fond of. It was just an idea for me, like, oh yeah, if I want to make him feel perhaps like he's a bit more distinguished, like a fancy or almost fancy adventure amongst maybe a bit more of a rowdy crowd is kind of what I imagined. So having a particular pipe, maybe that he whittled himself perhaps in the past, something that he's created himself, could be a fun little nod to the more creative side of this character as well, as opposed to him just being sort of a template adventure. And like 80% of this character still is that template adventure. We have a cape, we have a chest plate, we have a sword, some hand braces, leather boots. Nothing really stands out that much when it comes to the outfit that I've chosen to assign to him. But once again, it's the little extras that he's carrying, the way he's wearing the armor. Those are the things that hopefully set him apart and make him look a little bit more unique than most of his counterparts that you can find online on the average artist's portfolio. And this is just so much fun to play around with. So the ship pipe obviously was a bit more of a creative idea that I had, something that just came to mind. I'm quite fond of the idea as well. Wanted to get some of the wave patterns in there as well to keep the ocean theme alive. And we can choose very deliberately which of the props that he's carrying we want to perhaps give a little bit more of a special treatment. Because if everything's interesting on the character design, nothing really is. So you want to have a very clear sense of focus, a very clear hierarchy into what part of the design we want to put more emphasis on. And I knew from the start with this pose in particular, I was going to paint him in a scene, like an interior cabin with just candlelight lighting his book. So the pages had to be lit, really, which means he's also going to have to be backlit in this case. And with where I've put the light source, like the pipe almost automatically becomes a focal point, because that's the area of the highest contrast, essentially. That combined with the fact that obviously the inside of a pipe is glowing, so that's also going to draw some attention. So I decided to lean into those aspects as I was continuing this painting, as I was deciding how the composition of this painting should have to look. So having the focus immediately on the pipe allows me to now start eliminating things that I think are less important. So I'll, once I get into the painting process, I'll continuously be making choices on what I think is relevant to the painting, what I think is less relevant, and it becomes an exercise of essentially eliminating information that I want to put less emphasis on while highlighting the information that I think is important. So the highest amount of contrast needs to remain around where the face and the pipe is. That's where the eye should ideally go. That's where I would want you to look, at least. And I think, you know, with a lighting setup like this, can't really go wrong. Like, that's always going to be the focal point. But since I still want most of the design to be visible, it's not a full illustration, it's still sort of a presentation of a character design. I don't want everything to be hidden, which means I might need a secondary light source perhaps. Now we have the candle warm light source. He's inside of a cabin, which means the warm light is going to be bouncing around. So what if I put a window off to the left hand side? That window can now really serve as a way to cast a bit more of a cool glow, almost cool ambient light onto the rest of the body, like illuminating and revealing some of the less important parts as well, with much less emphasis than the very bright, warm, striking orange that we have in the scene. And that's the thought process that's continuously going around as I'm creating these paintings. Emphasis, de-emphasizing, a focal point, increasing contrast, decreasing contrast, those are the main choices I make at this point. And you might notice that I'm sort of getting hung up on some of the details already, like I've sort of avoided painting the entire lower side of the body, but you'll see in a second why that is. The lower part of the body is just much less important. It's not quite as big of a feature to the design, which means that's going to be painted much more quickly, much more roughly. Like the chest plate is catching some light and I wanted to have some details there. The face obviously is a focal point because that's always something people tend to look at. So the more refined brush strokes are sort of circling around that area where I have that main focal point. And the further I get away from that, the more I sort of push things into shadow, the more I hide the detail away, the more I use big rough brush strokes to get the idea of a texture across as opposed to painting the exact texture. And there's a lot of freedom in that because you can sort of disregard a lot of the things that you need to do. Like it starts becoming kind of liberating to paint in a bit more of a free way once you've set up that focal point, once you know that is actually something that's already working. And I've spent probably at this point, I'd say 3 hours on this painting so far, which is a bit on the slower side from what I usually do, but that's okay, that works perfectly fine. But the final bit, like from this point on to the end, that didn't really take me all that long because all of the setup has been done. Now it's just big brush strokes to kind of enhance some features, like the back of the cape, adding a dark shape or the shadow behind that, like using the table to my advantage as well, using the floor and the cast shadow of the character to kind of help lead the eye. Those are really big decisions, and once again, because it's less important than the focal point, I can be much more gestural and much more loose. The only danger in this case really is we don't want to have such a disconnect between the level of detail that it would start looking unfinished. That's something that we would ideally want to avoid. So we do want to bring the entire painting up to like the same standard, to the same level of finish overall. And to do that, it's not necessarily about the small brushstrokes that need to do that work. It's more so about actually making sure that the shapes that need to be clearly readable are readable, and that the use of color and values matches the use of color and values on the character itself, so it all feels like one coherent scene. And to do that, once again, it's not that much work, because you can still do that with those big brush strokes. You just have to, in some areas, crisp up the detail a little bit, make sure that the edges are quite sharp where they need to be. And as you can see, like at the table, for example, a lot of the information of the table itself is just kind of pushed into the shadow, and the lower contrast something is, the more we can afford to lose those edges. And that's by design. We want the focus to remain on the character. If I would start rendering everything up to the point where it matches perhaps a level of detail in the character, level of contrast in the character, you would start looking at the table instead of the character, and that's not something I want to have happen. So I need to make sure that I keep that clear sense of focus, and all of these different parts that I've mentioned in this video are working together to get that specific goal going. So the goal is focus on the character by using value contrast, meaning the dark pipe in front of the light glow, color contrast, the cool light from the window versus the warm light with a candle. Detail contrast, meaning the very small hairs in the eyebrows versus the very big brushstrokes on the shoes. All of this is what creates focus in a painting. And anything that creates contrast is something that you can use to get this idea going. So you don't have to limit yourself to just those parameters that I've just mentioned. There's way more that you can do. But using those as a foundation should really help you with where your character design is going and how you can keep that sense of focus on your design as well. Now, we've reached the end. I hope you found this interesting. Let me know if you have more suggestions on D&D related stuff that you'd like to see. But for now, that's gonna be it. Take care.